So what I'm going to be doing as part of this session is, there are three aspects that I'm doing. One is, I'm going to talk about the migration journey, the various phases in the migration lifecycle, basically. And then I'm going to introduce some of the tools and services that we have that really help customers to navigate through that migration journey. And then I'm going to go deep into the live demos where I'm going to take one application as an example, and then I'm going to use my tools and services to migrate that application. Today, I'm specifically going to migrate the databases in this session, and in the next session, I'm going to be pretty much doing the application migration, so that you will have an end-to-end migration experience in action, actually. So at first, what I'm going to be doing is, let's talk about the migration journey. So there are three major phases in the migration. One is the pre-migration phase, and then migration, and then obviously the post-migration.
Yes.
In the pre-migration phase, essentially, you would make inventory of your data estate and discover the application dependencies so that you exactly understand what applications needs to be migrated and what specific databases needs to be migrated together. And you also want to understand what is the right Azure target that you want to migrate, what would be the right size that I can migrate, and what are the migration blockers, the objects that are going to break that you need to mitigate. So you understand all these aspects as part of the assessment phase. And then once the assessment phase is done, then you would do the schema conversions, especially when you're migrating from heterogeneous sources like Oracle, Sybase. You need to do some kind of a schema conversion. And then you do the schema migration in the migration phase, and then you do the database migration. In the database migration, you would want to determine whether you want to do an online migration to minimize your downtime, or you would happy with a one-time migration itself. So depending on that, you would establish in the case of online migration, you would establish an online sync at first, and then you would call out a migration cutover whenever you're ready to do the migration cutover, right?
So you're talking about like retail scenario,
correct.
Let's say in production,
Yep.
and then you just cut over at like some time over the weekend.
Yeah, so that is the only time that you would incur the actual application downtime at that point of time, right? And then once that is done, once the database migration is done, then you would want to do some kind of a functional test and performance validation to make sure that the application is responding as expected. And then you apply all the mitigations as needed, and then you just release your applications for the business usage.
Awesome.
Yep, that's kind of a cycle that you have in the entire migration journey. Mm-hmm. And now let me introduce the specific tools and services that we have that really help you to take the journey, right? So before I go to the tools and services, on the left side, you see the specific sources that we support migrating from. And on the right side, you would see the specific targets that you can migrate to. Okay. And specifically talking about today SQL Server, we support migrating from, starting from SQL Server 2005 all the way up to 2017, that you can migrate to any of the Azure targets like Azure SQL Database, single databases, Azure SQL Database Elastic Pools, Azure SQL Database Managed Instance, or SQL servers which are running on the VMs. So you can really migrate to any of these platforms depending on the compatibility that you have.
Now you have AWS over there. What do you mean?
So yeah, so not only that we support migrating from on-premises databases, but we also support migrating from other cloud vendors like like AWS, RDS, whether your database servers are running on RDS or whether...
You mean SQL Server running on AWS,
yes,
RDS
platform.
and
EC2, that you can migrate, same thing with Google as well.
Okay.
So apart from that, we also support migrating from heterogeneous sources like Oracle, Sybase, DB2. We also support migrating from open sources like MySQL and Postgres, that you can migrate to Azure Database for MySQL and PostgreSQL respectively. We also support migrating from Oracle to PostgreSQL, which we are really seeing a lot nowadays. And in the NoSQL space, we support migrating from MongoDB to Cosmos DB, right? So those are the spectrum of source and target pairs that we have.
That is an awesome list, by the way.
Yes, thank you. And then when it comes to the tools, when it comes to the discovery, remember we talked about the very first thing is you do the discovery and application dependencies. You would want to use the Azure Migrate service, that fully managed service on the Azure, that really help you to discover your environment and also find out the app dependencies so that you exactly know what objects needs to be migrated together, right? And then we also use a DMA, Data Migration Assistant tool, specifically to assess your databases to find out, what is your preferred target, what is the size of your target, and are there any migration blockers that you need to address, any breaking changes that you need to address, all that stuff that you can get it from the DMA. And especially when you're migrating from heterogeneous sources, you would use SQL Server Migration Assistant tool to do the schema conversion and as well as for the migrations. And lastly, DEA, Database Experimentation Assistant tool, that really help you to do the performance validation. DEA,
Okay.
Database Experimentation Assistant Tool, which I'm going to be demoing in one of those sessions as well.
Awesome.
And then when it comes to the migrations, for the schema migrations and as well as the database migrations, we recommend to use Azure Database Migration Service, which is a fully managed service on the Azure, which really help you to scale your migrations. It also has rich orchestration capabilities to group together all the databases and then migrate them as a single unit of project. It supports both online migrations to minimize the downtime to near zero downtime migrations. And then it also supports offline migrations as well. And then everything that you see today can completely automate it to really scale your migrations as well, to extend your migrations to entire your data estate.
You mean like hundreds or thousands of databases using
exactly.
PowerShell?
Using the PowerShell commandlets or using the REST APIs, you can really migrate. And I have one of the customer, Capita, we recently published a article. They migrated around 10,000 databases within a period of 3 months from their data center to Azure using our services actually.
Fantastic.
Yep. So those are the tools and services. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give some kind of a deep dive demos using our tools and take you to the assessment and as well as the migration experience.
All right, let's see this in action.
Yep, okay. So let me set a context before I go to the demo here. So I'm going to be logging into my VM here. So here I do have an application called Parts Unlimited.
Okay.
Today the Parts Unlimited application is running on a on-premises SQL server and also on an on-premises Windows server using the IIS web service. Right? What I'm going to be doing is, as part of this demo, I'm going to be taking this application to Azure.
Okay.
So today in this session, particularly I'm going to be focusing on databases. In the next session, I'm going to migrate the application to the Azure Web Apps.
Okay.
Right? Makes sense?
Yes.
So while I'm doing that, the very first step you need to do the migrations is, obviously, I know my databases, I know my SQL Server that I need to migrate. Now I need to really assess my SQL Server to find out the compatibility of it, right?
Yes.
So for that reason, I'm going to use Azure Database Migration Service.
Yes.
But before that, I'm going to use my Data Migration Assistant tool to do the assessment.
Yes.
And as you know here, Data Migration Assistant tool is a free downloadable tool that you can freely download from Microsoft Download Center.
Okay.
And it is a desktop tool. And the reason it is desktop tool is that we want to make it close to the sources where the assessment happens.
Yes.
Right? So you can download from this Download Center here. I already downloaded it here and then I installed. And then I'm going to open up the Migration Assistant tool for us.
Fantastic.
And then the very first thing is you would want to create a project in the Data Migration Assistant tool. So you go here and then click on this plus button here, depending on whether you're doing assessment and migration. We also enabled migration scenario as well for POC migrations. For instance, if you're doing a test migration and you want to do it quick migration, then you can simply use the DMA tool. But for production migrations, which we are doing today, we recommend to use the Azure Database Migration Service.
Assessment first.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then I'm going to give a name to the assessment. And then my goal is to migrate to the managed instance, which is my PaaS service.
But go to source type for me. Just source SQL, the source server type.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's where you were talking about AWS.
Oh. AWS as well. So in case if you are migrating from RDS SQL Server, then we have an ability that you can assess your RDS SQL Server before you do the migration.
Thank you so much.
Exactly. You create a project here, and then there are a couple of options here. One is the check database compatibility. Basically, we look at all your schema and then find out if there are any objects that are going to block your migration, or are there any objects that exist. They let you to migrate, but at the same time, the functionality might break. So we'll give you that information as part of the compatibility, especially when there are objects that are using some legacy syntax. We want to make sure that we give the report on that legacy syntax and how to mitigate those objects.
Awesome.
And then check feature parity. We go beyond your databases, and also we look at the instance level configurations as well. For example, are you running SQL Server agent jobs? Are you running any ETL jobs using SSIS packages? We look at all these packages, all these features that are using outside of your databases, and then also we will give you a report whether these features are supported or not. If not supported, what are the mitigation things that you need to make?
More of app
compatibility. So I go to the next step here, and then you simply provide your source and target pairs here, and then you just connect. We support both Windows authentication, SQL authentication, and Azure Active Directory integration as well. I'm going to use the SQL authentication.
So this is your source SQL Server on-prem.
Right.
Okay, in a VM in a way.
And then I'm going to connect to it. It will go on and connect. Remember, I talked about parts unlimited. So this is the database that I can choose.
Yes.
And you might have seen this option here, where a lot of people ask us questions like, yes, you are really scanning your databases, which is good, database schema. But what about the application data layer? Because there are some queries that are coming from the app layer. How do we make sure that those queries are also compatible, migrating to the target, right? Now, we recently enabled a new feature where you can really get an extended events session going on the source databases so that we collect the workload queries, and then you bring that output here so that we can be able to scan the extended events sessions output and find out if there are any queries are going to break.
Okay.
So in this case, I already collected that kind of a extended event session traces, and I have this output here in my temp folder in demos.
Okay.
Data access layer parts, particularly for parts unlimited that I did. So I give that information here.
That's a new feature. I didn't notice
new feature,
before.
yes. I'm going to add that now. And then I'm also going to, if there are many other sources, then you can use this add sources button to add other sources as well. For example, I have one more SQL Server that I need to assess, then I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to add all those databases you can provide, right? You can do that. Once you add all those sources, you just click add start assessment button, right? So assessment will take a little time. So what I did is I already did the assessment for you. So I'm going to show that assessment.
Sure.
For that reason, I'm going to close this DMA here. And then I'm going to use the existing DMA here. As you see here, we have both SQL feature parity and as well as the compatibility issues. Particularly, we are examining the compatibility issues here now. As you see here, there are multiple categories here: breaking changes, behavioral changes, and migration blockers. So the very first thing that you need to look at is the migration blockers. That means without fixing this specific issue, you cannot even migrate to the target, right? In this case, it is file stream feature. Because file stream is not supported on the managed instance yet, it is suggesting that it is a migration blocker, so that you can either mitigate this with a different option, re-architect, or you can migrate to the SQL VM, right?
Okay.
Whereas breaking changes are something that they are not going to block you from migrating. All they do is the functionality might break when application is using those objects. So in this case, it is a non-ANSI style join. We have seen a lot of customers still using the legacy syntax for non-ANSI join, which is not being supported anymore on the latest SQL Server versions and as well as on the PaaS platform, on the SQL DB and managed instance. In this case, it also tells you from where the issue is raising. Right? In this case, remember we said we are going to be scanning the application, the traces as well. So here it is saying that this is coming from the application layer, right, as an ad hoc query. And then it is also telling you the specific query so that you exactly know what that query is.
Oh, that's pretty detailed.
Pretty detailed. And also it recommends you how to fix that as well.
That's
right?
awesome.
Yeah, so that way you should focus on breaking changes. You can apply these mitigation steps after the migration is done. And the next is behavioral change, where the functionality still works, but the behavior could be changing. So for example, in this example, unqualified joins, the query still might work, but at the same time, the performance can be degraded because of the new changes that we made to the query optimization. So that's the next priority that you would want to think about, right? This is great. Now you understand, ArchiveDB cannot be migrated to MI, but when it comes to, let's talk about the parts unlimited. Parts unlimited is pretty clean. So it is ready to migrate to MI.
All right.
This is great, actually. For example, if I have a couple of servers that I want to migrate, then it's very easy for me to look at the DMA and then find out, yes, this database can migrate to PaaS, this database should go to VM, that kind of analysis you could do. But what about if I have hundreds of SQL servers here? For example, if you look at my Excel sheet here, this is my whole inventory of my data center.
That's real world.
Real world, right? I got more than 100 SQL servers, and then I got 1,000 databases. How do you really understand which databases are ready to go to PaaS versus which databases are ready to go to VM? How can I get a summary view of that? For that, we recently integrated this assessment, the DMA assessment, into our Azure Migrate hub. Yeah, that way where you can get the summary of the entire data estate. So let me showcase the Azure Migrate hub here for you.
So basically, you've run the result, now you uploaded the whole assessment to the cloud.
I haven't uploaded yet, but here is once the assessment is done for this, you can do just upload Azure button. It is going to ask you, log into the Azure portal, find out a specific subscription where you created the Azure Migrate Hub and then the project, right? So while that is happening there, let me showcase the Azure Migrate Hub here.
Okay.
So Azure Migrate Hub is a single place where you can keep track of all the migrations across your servers, databases, and as well as the applications.
So basically, customers can go to portal.azure.com, search for Azure
Migrate, and this is the place where they start, right?
Awesome.
No matter whether they're migrating servers, applications, and as well as the databases. So it's a unified migration experience is going to give you here, right?
Awesome.
So particularly, I kind of uploaded all these different assessments, offline, and then let me show you how that view is going to look like. So I'm going to click on the databases. It is giving you a summary report for a CTO who wants to see how their data estate is looking to migrate to the Azure, right?
Wow.
So look at this. There are like, one or two SQL instances that I assessed, and then there are 466, almost 50% of the database is ready to go to SQL DB, including SQL DB, single database, and managed instance. And rest of the other databases are ready to go to SQL MI.
You always see higher number on VMs. So
VMs, because VMs is pretty much you don't see any blockers, right? It's just kind of. So if I want to particularly interested on my particular server that I did, right? For that, I'm going to copy. If I am a DBA, I'm particularly interested on one of those servers that I got here. So which is this, right? So I'm going to copy this, and then I go back to my here. See, it's showing you like, relative readiness of those instances migrating to PaaS. Like some instances are 100% ready to PaaS, some are not so. So particularly, I'm interested on this particular instance here. And then I want to see, what is the relative readiness of that one. It tells me that it is 85% ready. And I want to understand why it is only 85% ready. Then it is telling me that there are, how many, 7 databases maybe, yes. And then out of that, Archive DB is the one which is not ready to migrate to PaaS, which is managed instance, but it is ready to migrate to VM. That's the reason. Out of 7, 6 are ready to PaaS, and 1 is to VM. That's why you get that 85% thing, right? And I want to understand, it shows this is one migration blocker. And then if you want to get to that migration blocker, you can go here. And then we talked about this, right? It's a file stream. I already uploaded, so I'm going to close that. So it's telling you that this file stream feature is the one which is blocking it. That's why we marked that as a database ready to go to the VM. So great, that's right? Awesome. So you understand, which databases are ready to go to PaaS and which databases is ready to go to VM, and particularly PATS Unlimited DB, which is the subject of this entire session, is ready to go to MI, Azure SQL Database Managed Instance. The next question comes, what would be the size of that managed instance? Because managed instance has got multiple tiers and multiple SKUs, and I want to start with the right optimal SKU so that my performance levels are good, but at the same time I'm optimizing my cost as well. So
SKU recommendations.
Correct. So for that, the DMA enabled the SKU recommendations as well, and we have a step-by-step guidance how to get that. But let me quickly showcase, for the sake of the time, let me showcase how that SKU recommendations are going to look like.
Okay.
Where are my SKU recommendations? Right. So this is the output of the SKU recommendations that comes out of the DMA. It tells you server name. These are the specific databases that we have, and it is recommending 16 core. You can also apply your hybrid licenses as well, so that it is going to reflect the monthly estimate.
The discount.
Yep.
Yes.
And more than that, we also provided an option here to generate a provisioning script, so that you can use that, you execute that script, and then it will provision the entire your managed instance for you. So that's easy. Right?
So you can vary your parameters and then really generate
you just need to give the subscription ID, instance name, which VNet that you want to go. Just click this button. It will come up with a PowerShell script. Execute this PowerShell script on the portal, on the against Azure. It will create a instance for you.
Fantastic.
So far what we did, we started with Parts Unlimited database, the application, and then we did the assessment. We find out that the Parts Unlimited can migrate to MI. And then we also see the Azure Migrate Hub experience, where how can I find out the relative readiness of my estate. And then now I know my size of the instance, and now the next step is to migrate.
Awesome.
That's where I'm going to use Azure Database Migration Service to migrate.
Thank you so much so far for all this great information, It's great. So what do we do next now?
Next is I'm going to use the Azure Database Migration Service to perform the migration. I'm going to do a live migration. I'm going to do an online migration, actually.
Let's do it.
To minimize the downtime, right? So for the sake of the time, I'm not showing how to create a DMS instance, right? For the migration, it is very simple, 4 steps. One, you first create Azure Database Migration Service, and you establish the online migration sync. And then the third step is you do the cutover when you are ready to do the cutover. Fourth step is you just change the connection string to the new database migrated, and then your migration is complete. So four steps.
All that is documented anyway.
Yes, it is documented in our Azure Database Migration Guide here,
Yeah.
which I'm going to show you here.
Yeah.
So for example, if you go to a specific source, SQL Server managed instance, it has all that kind of a guidance that will take you through any migration that you are doing. This is the first place to go.
What's the URL again? datamigration.microsoft.com?
Yes, very simple. So it gives you the guidance on which tools to use in what state and all the stuff.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so let me go back here. The very first step after you creation the migration service is create a migration project here. So I'm going to do a test project here. I'm going to do a SQL Server, right? And a bunch of other sources that you can see there. And I want to migrate to MI. And then I'm going to use the online migration for that. So I'm going to use online migration here. I'm going to save it. And then create the project. Here you would want to mention the source. So I have all that source information in my here. So this is my source. So I'm going to copy it.
SQL Server in a VM.
Yep. So I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to use SQL authentication. And then I'm going to connect it. So at this point, it will validate the user ID and password, make sure that it can be able to connect, and it has all the permissions to do it and all that. In the next step, we use an application ID concept where the DMS service is going to use the application ID to connect to any of the other cloud services, like managed instance is a cloud service, and we use backup and restore technology for this migration. So we upload these backups to the blob storage at first. So blob storage is also an Azure resource. So the DMS service use this application ID to connect to these Azure resources. And if you want to know how to create an app ID, then we provided a link here. So I already created an app ID for the sake of the time here. And then I also have a key here that you can use. You put that on. Now select a subscription where your managed instance exists, right?
The destination.
Yep. And then you select the specific instance that you want to migrate. And then you provide the user ID for managed instance, and then password to connect, and then save. It's doing validations to make sure that the app ID is not expired, the key is not expired, and all that stuff. Now you can migrate the entire SQL Server as a whole if you want to, or you can migrate pick and choose. So for now, I'm going to migrate only the parts unlimited, which is my database, the application is using it. Now you need to provide an SMB network share where we can find the backups. So for that, I'm going to choose this one here.
Because that's your source system where the backups are.
Backups exist, right?
Okay.
So I'm going to do that. And then this is the folder where I already have the backups for you. And we also need to have an account for DMS to impersonate and then read those backup files from that location. And then you select the specific subscription where your storage account exists, right? So that we can upload those backup files to there. And then I'm going to share this. So let me explain you this. This looks a little complex. So you provided an SMB network share here where the backup files exist so that we can pick the backup files from there. You're also telling DMS to use this account, Windows account, impersonate, and then use that account to read the backup files and upload those backup files to a blob storage that you selected here, and then use for restore.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah,
That's
it's a two-step process in a way.
Yes. So I'm going to use save here. Again, all the validations happens. And if anything happens wrong here, it will tell you up front rather than failing at the end. By the way, everything that you are doing it here today, it can be automated, completely automated. So it's taking a little longer to validate. So there is a parts unlimited DB already exists.
Oh yeah.
See, that is the beauty of this actually.
Yes.
So for now, what I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to rename this database because I already migrated the database.
Yeah.
There is an option here to rename. So I'm going to put my name to it, my tag. So I'm going to save it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it performs the validations up front before the migration fails.
Exactly, absolutely. That's the right way to do it.
Yep.
Okay, number one, when should I use DMA rather than DMS?
Yeah, like I said, DMA also has a migration workflow, but that is more meant for doing a quick POC migrations, because for DMS service, there is a requirement that you need to have a site-to-site connectivity between on-prem to Azure, and we have seen some DBS have some issue, have some pushback from the network teams to enable all this, and it's kind of delaying the migration process. So we quickly enabled the migration workflow in the DMA as well, so that you can quickly do the migrations.
Awesome.
So for the sake of the time, you just create a project here and then just hit run migration. So what I did is, I'm not going to do that now. I just want to show the process here. I'm going to showcase the migration that I already established with the parts unlimited. Remember, we got an error that parts unlimited already exists.
Yeah.
It is because that I'm already doing it here.
Okay.
So you see here the run migration is going on right now, and then you see that the log shipping is in progress, and you see that the full backup is already uploaded, restored. Couple of transaction logs are uploaded and restored, and it also tells you what is the last time that the transactions are in sync between source and target, and what is the last log file it is being restored. Now what I'm going to do is, I'm going to go back to my parts unlimited server, and then hold on a second. I'm going to do a couple of transactions to showcase that my source is still online at this point.
Oh, yeah,
Your downtime is not started yet.
I see.
Yeah.
You have an app, like the whole website running, right?
Yeah.
Parts Unlimited?
Yeah, so parts unlimited. So I'm going to do lightning here, checking some parts here, breaks, maybe shop now. I'm going to shop now, right? Adding it to the cart, right? I did some transactions.
Okay.
Now assume that my downtime is already started now. So what I'm going to be doing is, I stopped my connections to the source server. I'm going to be doing the final log backup here. So I got the command already. I'm going to hit final log backup. It's going, so the final log backup is done. Now let's come back to the DMS here. Where is my DMS server here? Right, so I'm going to refresh this now.
Okay.
See, now the transaction log is being uploaded, the one which I just took. So it's going to take some time. For the sake of the time, assuming that this is already done, you just hit a cutover button.
Yeah.
Right? You have to make sure that pending transactions are 0 here. Right now it is showing 1 because we're still uploading it. But confirm it, assuming that it is also 0, and then just apply. Now the cutover happens. Once the cutover happens, the target database is going to be online. You just change the connection string. Your application is going to be up and running.
Wow. So thank you so much, Raj, for this great demo and information.
Thanks, sir.
It's much easier than I thought,
Thanks for the time.